Well, good morning, everyone. It's slow news day, huh? The people of Massachusetts had an opportunity to speak yesterday, and they spoke rather loudly that they'd like to see the Congress go in a different direction. The Massachusetts special election was unique in many ways, but I think we all experienced it all around the country, even though we might not be Massachusetts citizens. In my own case, I was flying back from Kentucky last Saturday, and a number of people on the plane brought up, as a lot of people have in the last few months, can you stop that health care bill? But most interesting was a woman who came up to me and she said, I'm a constituent of yours, but I'm married to a man from Massachusetts. Here he is, and she introduced me to him. He said, we're going to Massachusetts to vote for Scott Brown. Made a special trip to go to Massachusetts so he could vote for Scott Brown. So this was in many ways a national referendum, principally on the major issue we're wrestling with here in the Congress, which is whether or not the government should take over 1/6 of our economy, slash Medicare by $500 billion, raise taxes by $500 billion, and drive insurance rates up for most of the rest of our country. And I think we heard a large and resounding message yesterday in one of the most, if not arguably the most liberal states in America. The people of Massachusetts spoke and spoke loudly. One concern I know a number of you had about the outcome of this election would be whether the new senator would be seated soon. I'm convinced now that no gamesmanship will be played by the other side with regard to future votes in the Senate. Thanks to Senator Jim Webb of Virginia, he's made it clear he will not participate in any additional health care votes prior to Senator Brown being sworn in. And I noticed that elected officials in Massachusetts who are principally responsible for certifying the election, after earlier saying it could take up to 2 weeks, now indicated it could be as soon as today. So I don't believe that the kind of thing we've seen on full display with the Cornhusker kickback, the Louisiana Purchase, the Gatorade, the drafting the bill behind closed doors. I think the majority's gotten the message, and no more gamesmanship here, and no more lack of transparency. Let's honor the wishes of the people of Massachusetts and move forward with policy, with our policy debates. With that, let me call on our outstanding chairman of the National Republican Senatorial Committee, who played an important role in yesterday's victory, John Cornyn.
Thanks, Mitch. Well, first and foremost, I know we would all like to congratulate Scott Brown on an outstanding campaign he ran and won yesterday. There is no election that can be won without a good candidate, and one that understands the temper of the times, what people are concerned about, and is able to deliver a message that responds effectively to their concerns. And Scott Brown did it to near perfection. And what was the message that the people of Massachusetts were sending? It is they are simply fed up and tired of being shut out of the process. And what did they get yesterday with electing Scott Brown? They got a seat at the table. And that's what we've been wanting all year, is a seat at the table where we can work together on a bipartisan basis to come up with solutions to the problems that confront our country. Nothing more, nothing less. And so I hope that this will usher in a new era of transparency and willingness to work together, rather than the sort of special sweetheart deals cut behind closed doors that cause so much concern in the health care bill and elsewhere. And let me just say that the health care bill is a very important part of what was debated and decided yesterday in this election, but it's not all that was decided. The American people sent a very clear message through the voters in Massachusetts that they're concerned about the spending and the debt and the government intervention in their lives in ways that limits their freedoms and opportunities and the future of their children and grandchildren. And so I hope that message has been received. I hope that we'll be able to work together in the best interests of the American people. And again, let me congratulate Scott Brown on an outstanding victory and a wonderful campaign.
Okay. Okay.
Any questions?
We'll take questions.
Senator McConnell, can you talk a little bit about what's going to happen now with the healthcare debate moving forward? How does this change the game for you, particularly when the Democrats say that they want to continue to push forward and make sure that this bill passes?
Well, the risk of being redundant, what I think is clear is there'll be no further action in the Senate, thanks to Senator Webb, until Scott Brown is sworn in. I can't speak for the House. And there has been discussion, obviously, on the House side about whether or not they would simply take up the Senate bill and pass it. I don't consider myself an expert on the House, but I am aware of one issue that could be very problematic for them, and that's the issue of whether or not the taxpayers would pay for abortions. I know that the one Republican in the House who voted for the bill initially has indicated he could not support the bill in the absence of the Stupak language, and my assumption is the author of the Stupak amendment might have trouble voting for it. So I think there are a number of complications, but it's an internal Democratic matter about which none of us are great experts.
Senator McConnell, what is the bottom line, though? Is the health care bill, as we know it, dead?
I sure hope so. I sure hope so. What we ought to do, as we said repeatedly through the month of December, as you know, we were here every day, we ought to stop and start over and go step by step to concentrate on fixing the problem, which is the rising costs. And we laid out a series of things that we thought would address the cost problem without having the government take over 1/6 of our economy.
Senator, given that you're in a position in the fall to pick up even more seats, what incentive do you have, if any, to cooperate with Democrats over the next 10 months?
Look, there's no way to predict with certainty what the atmosphere will be 10 months from now. We were elected to do the people's business. And what we have been saying repeatedly is that we would like to participate in the process of crafting solutions to America's problems. That opportunity was denied us on health care. You saw the result. The American people looked at an effort to jam the minority, totally opposed to it, a minority totally opposed to it, and the measure then ended up lacking credibility with the American people. If they want to accomplish things around here, a better way to go is not to try to jam us because they have a big majority, but rather work on these issues with an open mind and with a genuine bipartisan approach. Those kinds of measures end up being the kinds of things you can sell to the American people.
Senator McConnell, you said that the people of Massachusetts spoke loudly last night, but nowhere in State Senator Brown's campaign did he use the word Republican. And last night in his victory speech, he said it was a great victory for independence. Do you think the people of Massachusetts specifically chose a Republican last night?
Well, let me say that in my state, which is 2-to-1 Democrat, I can't recall a single time in any race I've ever run where I put the word Republican in an ad. Now, one of my favorite sayings is, my mother didn't raise any foolish children. If I'm running in Massachusetts as a Republican and 12% of Massachusetts is Republican, it doesn't strike me that that's a smart way to campaign. So I give Scott Brown credit for running an intelligent campaign that obviously he understood his state, a state in which there are 3-to-1, there are 3 times more Democrats than Republicans, and more independents than all the rest combined. And I think, as he indicated in his speech last night, he was able to connect with the independent voters of Massachusetts. And they wanted to send him to Washington to do business differently. And I thought it was an inspired campaign. He obviously electrified the public and did something that no Republican has been able to accomplish in Massachusetts since 1972. Yeah, come on in, John.
Let me just mention something responsive to that. I think you can't just look at what happened in Massachusetts in isolation. You have to look at what happened in Virginia, what happened in New Jersey. And what happened is that independents, the very people who put together the winning coalition for Barack Obama and Democrats and put them in power, are fleeing in droves. And what that gives us, what that gave Scott Brown, is an opportunity to talk about the things that they were most concerned about, losing their jobs, losing their homes, They were concerned about health care because they saw it as a misplaced priority because job were their #1 priority. So what I think it gives us is a chance to continue that conversation with independents, without whom no candidate can win. And I think it's a very clear trend. And Scott Brown and his campaign did a masterful job of understanding his state, understanding the mood of the electorate, and understanding what their priorities were, and he spoke directly to that. That's why I think he was so successful.
Senator McConnell, you talked about a new era of bipartisanship. Most of the votes in the Senate, well, in the House too, up until this point have been pretty party line with, between past and with no Republican votes or few. Do you expect that dynamic to fundamentally change because of the math?
Well, it's up to the majority. It's up to the majority. They chose to go left. In my view, they misread the electorate in 2008 and decided to pursue a largely dramatically left-of-center agenda. And we've said repeatedly throughout last year, and I'll say again now, that we're prepared to meet them in the middle for truly bipartisan solutions to the problems the American people that sent us here to grapple with.
Does that mean you're willing to participate and have your party members participate in this deficit reduction commission that President Obama is expected to announce?
Well, it means we're open to discussing any of the issues that are before us. I'm not going to decide today what we're going to do in the future, but as a general rule, we have said from the very beginning, we want to be a full partner. You may have more votes than we do, but if you do it all by yourself, the public probably isn't going to buy it. And I think that's been amply demonstrated back in 2009. Maybe they'll take this message and take a different approach. We'll have to wait and see.
This morning, Massachusetts notwithstanding, David Axelrod said that they fully intend to pursue President Obama's full agenda. Do you see this election as a repudiation of that big government, big spending agenda?
Well, as Senator-elect Brown said last night, it sounded to me like by 100,000 vote majority in one of the most liberal states in America, people said in a rather outspoken fashion, with a high turnout, an unusual high turnout in a special election in January, for goodness sake, that they'd like for us to go in a different direction. Goodness, I think that's about as clear a message as I've ever seen delivered in a campaign, in an election.
If you get that opportunity and the majority reaches out to you, are there some incremental things on health care that you'd like to see worked on together?
We have said repeatedly what we thought ought to be done on health care, repeatedly, every day in the week in December. And we remain open to trying to do this right, to stop this effort. This is the wrong direction to go, and to sit down together and try to go step by step to fix the problem that we all know exists in American health care, which is cost. Okay.
Can I ask you about reconciliation, since you're kind of the point man for that? Is it, since the most recent talk seems to be if the House can pass the Senate bill, which is a very high hurdle, that they would pass some sort of fix to the bill using reconciliation. I wonder your view of whether or not that's possible, and then separately, can you tell us whether or not you'll support this debt commission by executive order?
Well, reconciliation would be an extremely difficult lift, because remember, anything that's more weighted towards policy than towards budgetary activity is subject to the Byrd rule and has to get 60 votes to stay in the bill. So large segments of any issue as policy-driven as health care would be knocked out under the Byrd rule under reconciliation. So it would end up being a Swiss cheese event. Whatever went to the floor would end up coming out looking like Swiss cheese, I suspect, because of the Byrd rule. On the debt commission, I think the president has proposed a car without an engine. I mean, I look at it as almost a very cynical act by the administration, because basically they've created this, they're suggesting that they create this vehicle, which is an executive order, which is by definition partisan. And the whole purpose of the commission was to be bipartisan. It can't enforce itself because it doesn't have statutory structure. There's no way you can require a vote, and the Senate has 100 people who might stand in the way of a vote or exercise their rights to amend, which basically undermines the purposes of the exercise. And you can't fast track it, because the Senate doesn't fast track things unless you have a statutory fast track framework. So it's a nothing burger, in my opinion.
Senator Murkowski, can you explain what you're planning on the EPA preemption, and who have you
supporters for an amendment or a motion of disapproval?
Well, as you know, given the UC that we entered into the end of December before we went on recess, each side was allowed a series of amendments. I was to be allowed an opportunity to bring up an amendment as it related to the EPA regulation of emissions. This is something that we have been trying to bring to the forefront now for months. We're denied the opportunity back in September to advance an amendment. We've got several different options, not the least of which is an amendment to the debt limit that we would have to introduce today according to that UC. As you know, I've also been pursuing a resolution of disapproval, a different mechanism, but either way that we choose to take, and at this point in time my inclination is to proceed with the resolution of disapproval. I think that is a more clear path forward, but either way I think it's important that we demonstrate repeatedly that the preferred alternative when it comes to regulating emissions in this country is to move through a legislative procedure, a legislative route that will allow for a balancing of how we truly reduce our emissions in this country, while at the same time ensuring that we don't kick the economy in the head and further wound it. We need to be doing this with a balance. When we talk about climate legislation, that climate legislation should go through the legislative process, not through the EPA and the regulatory process.
Following up on that, Senator McConnell, in light of the election last night, do you see that the climate and energy debate is probably dead for the year? Like Senator Graham is still trying to work with Kerry and Lieberman on this. Do you think the overall efforts to try and do cap and trade is dead for you?
I would say there is minimal enthusiasm, to put it mildly, for cap and trade. But again, the majority leader sets the agenda, and he'll have to decide whether he wants to devote a floor time in the Senate to that proposal.
Senator McConnell, can you also just talk about the effect of last night's election on President Obama's nominees, and more specifically, I'm thinking about Dawn Johnson. Is her nomination now dead?
The nominations process around here is sometimes contentious, usually based upon the nominee, and that has been one of the most contentious nominees. Senator Kyle, do you have anything to add about that? She's been one of our more contentious nominees, and there have been a significant number of my conference, and I think at least some of the other side that have not felt she should go forward. As to how that will ultimately be resolved, I couldn't tell you.
So, Senator,
okay.
What are you prepared to work with the Democrats on?
I'm sorry?
What are you prepared to work with the Democrats on?
I think they're on the right track in Afghanistan. I was just there. Senator Murkowski was with me last week. I think the President's doing the right thing with the deployment of 30,000 additional troops in Afghanistan. I believe this is a strategy that will work. He has assigned the sharpest people we have to that theater, the sharpest military people, the sharpest CIA, the sharpest AID, the sharpest state. The most talented individuals we have available are all in Afghanistan, and focusing on Pakistan as well, and I commend him for the decisions that he's made. I think he's off on the wrong track in a couple of areas that are related to this, such as suggesting a date certain that we might begin to draw down there, which has created a propaganda tool for the Taliban. And there's also widespread confusion in the military about what our policy is with regard to interrogation and detention. Very much confusion about that. Having said that, I think the decision to go in there with a counterinsurgency strategy is the right thing to do, and I believe virtually every member of our conference supports it. Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you.